The Other Side of Fear, a Backpacker's Memoir by Jenni Reavis. Unhidden Heroines, Book Series, Book Number 1. Chapter 27, Peru-ish. Everything flowed great for a couple of months in Santiago. Then I was notified that my 90-day visa was about to expire. Chile would let me back in if I crossed the border and came back. Maybe. Or I could think about crossing borders again and relocating. I was really happy with everything the way it was and didn't feel it was time to go to Argentina yet. Or I could go to Peru. I had met a guy in Quito that I really, really liked, and the intense connection that we shared was mutual. He left Quito en route to Santiago, but decided to stop in Lima with no plans to make it to Chile. Then Chile suddenly changed its border laws, making it nearly impossible for him to arrive and find work. I was torn because, as responsible as my routine was, it was also boring. The thought of going to have an adventure in a new country with a romantic partner seemed enthralling to me. I decided to take the risk. If it doesn't go the way that I hope, at least I can say I tried. At least I'll have seen another part of the world, and I can leave doors open here so that I can come back. I put my 2 weeks notice in at work and worked like crazy night and day so that my last paycheck would be really big. Chilean currency went much further in Peru than in Chile. I gave Maddie my notice so that he could look for a new person to rent my room. 2 weeks later, I showed up in Lima on a one-way ticket, where we spent a romantic week on the beach in Miraflores, and we both agreed that the vibe in Lima was not the one where we wanted to live. We both needed to find stable work. As we walked through the bus terminal listening to the names of towns being called out, we both heard someone yell, "Arequipa!" We turned to look at each other and knew that this was our place to go. Off we went on another bus crammed full of people with roosters crowing on board. We lived with a family who took us in very kindly, and after about a month or so, we both found work. One day, I walked out to the backyard and discovered Napo and his brother skinning the guinea pigs, which had been alive on the rooftop. Napo informed me that they were preparing their guinea pigs for a birthday bash, and they had been raising those guinea pigs specifically to offer as a delicacy to their guests at this party. For a week afterward, every time I opened the fridge, I saw a leftover guinea pig on a stick sprawled out on a plate, and it traumatized me. The chapter in Peru is most important because this is where I got my first job teaching English to students inside of a university classroom. I had the sleeves of my long sleeve shirt rolled up one day when a student asked what the tattoo in English on my right arm said. "Everything you want is on the other side of fear." "Teacher, why you tattooed that?" he asked. "What means other side of fear? What is fear? Fear is like scare?" I stood there against my desk, quiet. Every eye in the classroom was on me, and I thoughtfully reminisced about that quote and the frame it came in when my therapist gave it to us in group therapy years before. It reminded me of where I was at that time, the time I held that framed quote in my hands the day before I embarked on this crazy journey, and then getting it tattooed before leaving, and all the steps I had taken to get where I stood right there in that classroom of 35 students in Peru. I told them my story. And it was the first time that I had ever really shared it with anyone. My students were enamored, and so was I, and from that moment on, we used storytelling in the classroom to learn English. We became a family. A couple years later, a student from that classroom sent me a photo of her ankle, where she now had that same quote tattooed. She said, "Thank you for sharing your story, Miss Jenni. It inspired me to push forward out of a dark place and keep reaching. I also wanted that tattoo to remind me to always face my fears and push past them." That showed me the powerful ripple effect that can occur when we have the courage to tell our stories. Nothing in Peru went as I imagined, but I learned some very valuable lessons, and I don't regret any of it. The university would not commit to a contract for me to work there long term, and they kept pushing off paying me, so I found an online teaching job working for another Chinese company where I taught kids. The Wi-Fi was not consistent enough for that, so it was stressful to constantly try and make things work. The relationship I was in had served its purpose. We parted on mutual terms, and I left with a broken heart after 5 months of nothing flowing smoothly. When I knew it was time to go, I first went back to Colombia to my beloved Jardín, where I could cry in the mountains. I also decided it was time to go back to the States for a few weeks, not only to get some legal paperwork done, but something told me that it was my grandma's last holiday, and of course, I needed to see my Gracie Ann. After Harding, I went back to the northern coast of Colombia to see Carlos in Santa Marta for 1 week. On the rooftop of that hostel, I crossed paths with Juan Carlos and his friend Pandita. We spent hours on the rooftop, rocking back and forth in hammocks, smoking fat doobies, and having the deepest conversations I have ever had with strangers. Although it felt like we had known each other for lifetimes, and we were finally meeting in this one. I had already been to Santa Marta a few times at this point, but something else had made this specific trip memorable, was when an older gentleman came into our bunk and dumped his bag on his cot. He shared with me that his name was Pablo. He was from Spain, and he was a professional published writer, having recently retired and gone through a divorce. For years, everything I did in my life was for my career and my family. When I got through my divorce, I decided that life is too short not to do everything that my heart desires. So I bought this backpack and a one-way ticket to Colombia. I'll travel south for a few months until I feel like I've seen everything in the countries I want to see. He had literally just arrived for the first time, making this his very first hostel experience. I remembered the gift that Orr gave me at my first hostel experience in Medellin, and I paid it forward to him. We sat out on the rooftop drinking ice-cold beers as I shared some of my travel stories, and he took notes on things he should see as he trekked south. From there, I went back to Oklahoma for a couple months. Saw my grandma and Gracie Ann, saw my family a bit, and taught any online classes that came my way. I discovered that I loved teaching English and was very good at it, but I felt like I didn't know how to do it well. I found an online master's degree program in linguistics with a minor in ESL teaching and applied for it last minute. While still in the States, I got the notice that I would start my online classes in January the following year. My short trip back to the US confirmed something I had already known for a long time. Life in the US was simply not for me, and I wanted to keep drifting across borders. Something really big was happening inside of me, and I had to continue on the path I found. So I decided to pick up where I left off in Santiago. I discovered, once I got back to Santiago, Chile, that the room I had rented from Maddie the first time I was there would be available by the time I arrived. I was able to have the same amazing view, back in the same spot where I already had a routine with Maddie. However, I discovered that the door to my previous online job teaching ESL was no longer open. The owner had made some business shifts that did not allow for my full-time position. It was super expensive to live in Santiago compared to anywhere else in South America. I had inconsistent part-time hours teaching adults in China through an online company based out of Beijing, but that would hardly be enough to cover expenses, let alone save for later travels. This was how I got my first job, working for a company that would send me all over the city to people's business offices or homes to give 90-minute English lessons. It pushed me out of my comfort zone to learn how to navigate the public transport services, sometimes taking 2 or 3 buses just to get to one place. The job paid very little, but the experience was enriching, and I built friendships with students who will be lifetime contacts. The most memorable students at the time were Alejo and Aleja, originally from Bogota, but living in Santiago for work. It made me so happy to connect with people from Colombia. Twice a week, I gave them private lessons at their kitchen table, and Aleja always shared her Colombian pastries and coffee with me. Another highlight of my week was going to a fancy office in the ritziest area of Santiago to give private lessons to a fashion designer. She needed to learn English to do business with colleagues in China who sold fabric for her clothing line. It was cool to invest my talent in the lives of other individuals who would then use it to go pursue their paths around the world. I ran myself ragged all over the city, giving private lessons, taught online classes as they flowed my way, and pushed through an extraordinarily difficult first semester in the field of linguistics, which was the hardest thing I had pursued academically thus far. I returned to my workouts at the same gym a couple of blocks away to keep up my weightlifting routine, and one day I met a guy named Roger. He was an American who began a rogue bicycling adventure in Argentina with a friend and made it all the way to Santiago when their bikes needed maintenance. I was grateful for his friendship because I was often alone at that point. Lisa had married and moved to Brazil before disappearing completely. Jose and Orlando were doing great, but they were busy with their new lives. Orlando had a great job and was able to start bringing family members over from Venezuela. Jose had 2 jobs and was pursuing his dream in modeling and fashion. All I did was work every day and night. After everything was done, I would chain smoke menthols out of my window, pour myself a cup of red wine, or pop the top on a liter of Chilean beer. I felt tremendous aching sadness in the depth of my soul. It had been there for so long. I heard a lot, but I kept myself so busy that I didn't pay mind to it until nighttime came around. Right before my semester ended, I got the phone call that my grandma had passed. But I already knew that. I had felt it. Her spirit had left her body a day or 2 before her physical body stopped. We'd had our last video chat a month or so before that, when she told me she was proud of me, that I'm beautiful, and that she loved me. I still have all her travel stories tucked away in my heart. They were on my mind every time I got on a bus to go to a new place. The morning after I finished finals, I thought about what I would do with 3 months of break between semesters. The thought of using the time to run myself ragged, roving the city and sitting behind my computer begging for online students made me cringe. My life was starting to feel like it had in the States, like a hamster on a wheel. If I were meant to stay in one place forever, I would be a tree and grow roots. But I don't have roots. My wheels are my feet, and I have wings to fly as high as my heart desires to go. I looked out the window at the view of the mountains behind the city. I had been looking at them for months. Maddie! He came in from the kitchen and peeked around my doorframe. Jenni! What's behind those mountains? I asked him. Argentina. Argentina. I had 3 months of freedom before focusing on 4 months of very difficult work for yet another university. I'm going to work as much as I can for 2 more weeks, and then I'm leaving. It's time to have more experiences, and I'll start with seeing what's on the other side of those mountains, I announced. The following weekend, Roger and I went to the theme park Fantasyland in Santiago. I had not ridden a roller coaster in years, and I laughed so hard that day riding the rides over and over and over that I swore I peed my pants at least once. It was the first time that I saw a lookout point view over a foreign city from the height of a roller coaster. Afterward, we walked a couple of miles to go spend time with Jose next to the pool back at the hostel. And I was so overjoyed to run into Pablo, the retired man I met at the hostel in Santa Marta who had just started his adventure. What were the odds that out of all the hostels in all the countries between where we met and where we were, that we would be there at the same time in the same place? He was so excited to tell me about what he had learned about himself while traveling, and I was ecstatic to learn that he had taken the time to see some of the things I'd recommended, including spending a week in my beloved Jardín. Then, one night, after a long day of teaching classes, I decided it was a perfect moment to pack up my belongings. It was time to go see Argentina.